All right. Good morning. Welcome to Thursday. As I said this morning, it kind of feels like Friday, but I guess it's not, right? The deal. It's still Thursday.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Ugh. Okay. Fine. It's Thursday. If you say so. So what do you want to talk about today? China? Really? That's such a coincidence because that's exactly what we were going to talk about. It's so fortunate that that's what you wanted to talk about because that's what we're going to do. Wow. See, Adil, we're connected, right? Okay. All right. So Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Blake is here. Good morning. Baha's here. I hear him in the hallway. Good morning, Baha. Michelle is here, good morning. Noah is here, good morning. And Irene is here, good morning to you. All right, so to grant your wish, Hadil, China. Yesterday we were talking about Confucius and we watched part of a documentary on his life, right? And I asked you a bunch of questions. I asked you a bunch of questions on Confucius, right? And so, let me see. So, I asked you this. I said, what rituals did young Confucius practice? And we said that they were rituals that we didn't really get them described to us, so we don't really know exactly what was done. We saw some people pouring water into bowls, and to be honest, I don't really know what the rituals were about, but it's kind of less important how to do them is what their function was or what people understood them to do. And so here they were meant to kind of keep balance between these two cosmic forces, right? So the Chinese imagined that the entire universe was kind of a struggle between two cosmic forces, right? The earth and the sky, the phoenix and the dragon, right? The male and the female, and they were kind of locked in struggle, and humans' responsibility was to ensure balance between these huge chaotic forces, right? And so Confucius would have grown up doing these rituals, and his mother would have done them, and basically everyone in society would have done these rituals, right? The dragon and the phoenix. Right. So I just highlighted this because, again, it supports this theme that we've heard all the way through, that when people start to switch to intensive agriculture, when people start to farm and grow lots of food, that gives them the ability to do other things, right? And so some people can be farmers, other people can do things. And for Confucius, he has time to think and to philosophize and to, create some sort of system of rules for people to follow, right? If you're busy farming, you don't have time to do that sort of thing. And we said that Confucius here was engaged in systematic philosophical inquiry. And again, it's kind of interesting because there were other people in other parts of the world who were engaged in this as well, right? Specifically Socrates, who is mentioned here in the documentary, and Buddha, who we've already met. And all of these three men, and probably more people as well, but these three individuals were trying to figure out the nature of reality, how to end suffering, how to be a good person, how to be a good citizen, what was the purpose of life, how should we have a good society. All of these questions these guys were thinking about, right? We met the Daoists, and the Daoists were kind of I guess a prevailing spiritual school of thought in ancient China. And Daoists believe in the way, right? So the universe has kind of a will of its own. The universe and nature have kind of a way in which they work. And humanity's job isn't to mess around with the way or fight the way. Humanity's job is to align themselves with the way. And if you do align yourself with the way, then all these good things will come to you, right? Life will be easy. if you simply align yourself with the way the universe operates, right? What was Confucius's reaction to hearing that? How did he feel? It's no good. Why?
Because he believed that people should have the ability to change their own lives. Like, if people believe in Tao, then they won't be able to improve their well-being. I don't know. So,
yeah, and if I can bring up the fancy word again from this morning, agency, right? The ability to sort of go out into the world and make something happen, to do something. And Confucius looks at the Daoists and they're like, yeah, there's no agency here. They're just kind of trying to do what nature says, and if that's the case, then nobody will try to make anything better. Nobody will try to improve things, right? And so Confucius believes in agency, right? He believes in going out into the world and making a difference, right? He's living in a time that's quite chaotic. It's the Warring States period. There's lots of warfare and upheaval and kings being overthrown and all kinds of chaos. And Confucius feels that no, we're not going to solve this problem by aligning ourselves with the way. We're going to solve this problem by figuring out what we need to do, right? And then making changes, when creating a society that is peaceful and stable and just, right? So yeah, he wants to do something about it, right? The Daoists are kind of like, no, don't do anything, just live in alignment with nature. And Confucius says, no, that's ridiculous. We're gonna fix this, right? He's got a can-do attitude, as they say. So we said Confucius looked for inspiration in the past, which is often what people do, whether they're writing a book or music or politics or whatever. People often look to the past to inspire themselves in the present. We'll see this actually a little bit with the Roman Empire, because the founding fathers of the United States definitely looked back at the Roman Republic and used it as inspiration to create their own country, their own government. But here, Confucius does something similar. He looks back to a period before the Warring States, right? To the Zhou Dynasty, where he kind of imagined it was a bit of a golden age for China, right? One of peace and stability and goodness, and people doing honorable, moral things. And again, whether it was that or not is questionable. Sometimes when people look at the past, they see only what they want to see. They don't really see how it was. But he imagines this to be a golden age. And so he kind of pulls a few things from the Zhou Dynasty history and tries to kind of remake it for the age that he's living in, right? So this quote here sums up a lot about Confucius's approach, right? Because, and again, it's very different from a lot of world religions, right? Because a lot of world religions are do what God says, right? God tells you what to do. God gives you rules or commandments or whatever, or the gods require sacrifice, and you do what they want. And if you do, then you'll be okay, kind of thing, right? But here, Confucius is not talking about the gods. I'm sorry, you're struggling over there. I shouldn't laugh at you, but he's not saying, he's not talking about the gods. He's not talking about karma or transmigration. He's saying do everything in accordance with humanity, right? So if you have a choice to make, if you have a decision to either do something or not do something, how should you decide? Well, what is the humane thing to do, right? Don't do things to other people that you wouldn't want them to do to you, right? And so that's a very worldly thing to say, right? And again, kind of like Socrates, he's not looking for answers up there, right? He's not looking to the gods or God for inspiration and clarity. He's looking around himself, right? He's looking down at the earth and at the people and saying, yeah, how should we decide what to do? Well, we should do things that don't cause people to suffer, right? We should do things that are humane, that treat people as humans. We shouldn't do things to other people that we wouldn't want them to do to us, which is in some ways quite obviously simple, but in other ways not so much, right? Because sometimes we don't think about things this way. So what does he do? Well, he kind of takes this idea of, these ancient, rituals to balance the universe, and he kind of refashions them. And he's like, okay, well, if those ancient rituals were supposed to balance the universe, maybe our own personal rituals can balance society, right? And can sort of balance ourselves. And so he's got all kinds of rules for etiquette and dress and how to walk and how to sit, and he's very careful with his mat being straight and his clothing being perfect, and he shakes hands a certain number of times, and there's a lot of kind of social norms, if you will, right? Lots of rules of etiquette. And he kind of says that if you do all these things, that if you do them on the outside, they will actually change you on the inside, right? Being sort of very conscious and neat and focused and precise, doing those things can actually change how people feel and behave on the inside. And Mulder's kind of smiling. Why?
So, you're saying virtue comes from having OCD.
Well, does virtue come from having OCD? No, because OCD comes from the inside, not the outside. But it's interesting, right? Because there's thoughts and feelings and behavior, right? And what comes first usually? Our thoughts or our feelings or our behavior? What's the cycle? Thoughts, feelings, and behavior. What comes first? What? Thoughts come first? Feelings come first?
Feelings, then you get a thought of it.
Yeah.
What you're feeling, and you act according to it for behavior.
Okay. I think that's probably how most things come about. Not all things, because obviously we think about things. But often, yeah, we have a feeling. We have a thought about that feeling, right? We sort of contextualize that feeling within our life and what we think is happening. And then we act accordingly, right? We do or don't do something based on our thought and based on our feeling, right? And that's often the way it happens with us humans, right? We have a feeling, we have a thought about it, and then we do something, right? You feel your stomach grumble, you're like, I must be hungry, I haven't eaten in a few hours, and then you go to the fridge and see if you can find a snack, right? That's often the way it works. But Confucius is saying here, actually it works the other way too, right? If you behave a certain way, that will change your thoughts, and that will actually change your feelings. And so we said it goes this way, but Confucius is saying it actually works in the other direction too. The things you do can change your thoughts, and your thoughts can change your feelings. And then you can kind of remake yourself from the outside in. What do you think about that?
It's like not maybe in the three places, like first thoughts, you think about something, like you're feeling hungry, then the feeling comes in.
Oh, right.
Then you act it.
Sometimes that happens too, right? Sometimes you think about something and then you have
an image is portrayed in front of you of pizza. When you start thinking of pizza, you feel hungry and you act it.
Right. So yeah, sometimes those things interact in complex ways, right? So there's not one way in which thoughts and feelings and behavior work, and sometimes it's a very complicated sort of connection. But Confucius is saying, yeah, maybe thoughts come first, maybe feelings come first, but if you practice appropriate behavior, you can change your thoughts and your feelings. Do you think that's true? Yeah? Can you think of a good example where behavior actually changes thoughts or feelings?
Maybe like you have a thought of a certain culture,
Mhm.
and then if you practice it, you get to know the original reason of it, and then your thoughts and behaviors change towards it.
Okay, I see that. So yeah, so if you practice a certain culture, it will change your perception of it. What else do you think? I think there are scientific studies, which I cannot quote to you, but what they recommend is if you want to feel better, like if you're feeling kind of sad or kind of mopey or whatever, try smiling, even if you don't feel like it, because the act of smiling and using those muscles actually can change the way you feel. It can actually help you to feel better. And so it's a weird thing, and it feels like it shouldn't work, but just the act of trying to smile will actually make you feel better. And so there is some science behind what Confucius is saying, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. Mulder's, you're thinking there.
Isn't he saying that we don't have positive feelings? I thought he was saying if you think about everything you do, then you'll be forever.
Yeah, well, so it's a bit of a, these things are closely connected for sure, right? But he's saying, do things this way, but don't just do them mindlessly, do them mindfully, right? So do them on purpose and focus on them, right? And so, if he says, when you come in the front door, take off your shoes and put them on the mat, right? And so he's saying do that, but also do it with intention, right? Make sure it's done perfectly. Make sure the boots are not, falling over each other or backwards or whatever. Make sure they're nicely placed, right? Pay attention to do the thing, but do it with purpose. Do it with mindfulness. And that's what will have the effect, right? Because he wants people in society to behave appropriately, right? He wants them to treat each other with dignity and respect and compassion, and to be mindful of other people. And so he's saying, do everything that way, right? Whether it's how you dress or how you put your boots on the mat when you come in, do everything with intention and do it correctly. And if you do so, that will kind of snowball, right? And that will lead to a society full of people who are mindful and who are treating people with respect and dignity and attention, right? Not carelessness. Whether he's right or not, I don't know. But that's kind of what he's saying, I think, anyway. Oh yeah, right. So we started watching this section of the documentary yesterday, and we heard a little bit about some of these things. Do you remember what Confucius said about music?
Is it like it comes down, they have some different type of music?
Maybe. So music is good for your kind of emotional state. Sometimes, yeah. He was a huge Harry Styles fan, by the way. Most people don't know that. Confucius, never mind.
He actually has an English last name for
He has an English last name?
yeah.
Confucius?
Yeah, in Chinese, his last name sounds like Johnny, so everyone has a joke about him calling him Johnny.
They're calling him Johnny?
Yeah, his last name sounds like Johnny.
What's it, what is, so they gave him a last name? Or
Yeah, it's kind of a joke, but his actual last name sounds like Johnny.
like what is it?
Johnny Lei.
Zhonglei?
Yeah, so it sounds like Johnny, so people.
Is that a historical last name or Okay. I don't know that I get the joke or the funniness of it, but
This word sounds like dollars with equal gift in the English translation.
right. What are their kind of feelings about Confucius? Like,
They teach that in Chinese literature to describe that.
okay. There's elements of his teaching that people are still using in some contexts
Yeah, literature.
in literature. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. What does he say? What does he say about music? So it helps calm you. It helps soothe you.
Immediate communication.
It is a media for communication. Absolutely. Right. And specifically, what about playing music? Like if you were the one playing the instrument. Do you remember what he said?
She said something about harmony, harmonizing.
Right. So yeah, the I guess maybe like the music is something that to perform it, you almost have to do it in the way that Confucius says that you should do everything, right? So if you don't play the right notes at the right time, in the right tempo, well, you're not really playing the music. You're just making noise, right? So the idea of being intentional and doing things correctly at the right time in the right order, music is kind of all about that, right? And so Confucius is kind of a big supporter of music because to play music kind of embodies his philosophy, right? You have to do things correctly, you have to play the notes at the right time, at the right tempo, and that's the only way that you get a good result. And if everyone, especially if you have multiple musicians, if everyone is doing things mindfully and correctly, then you have music, right? You have a song that appears. If people don't do that, you just have a bunch of random annoying noise, right? Which I think is how he sees society at the time. It's a bunch of random annoying noise. Everybody's just doing whatever. But if everyone was being mindful and doing things correctly and playing their part, society would be like music. It would be like working together, right? Which is kind of interesting. I don't know if it's realistic, but it's an interesting idea. So what did he think his mission was? Do you remember that part? What his mission was? Confucius decided what his mission would be. Say that one more time. Yeah, I think that's kind of it, right? He wanted to bring China back to a golden age, a society in a state of harmony, right? A society that was playing music, metaphorically, not literally, right? So yeah, he feels it's his job to try to return Chinese society to some sort of golden age, which is quite a goal to set for yourself, right? That's a big one. The last thing we heard about yesterday, it was when they were looking at that tomb of an emperor. How did Confucius take this father-son relationship in sort of Chinese culture and extend it to rulers? What did he say? Don't remember? Right. So Confucius was looking at families and saying, wow, families cooperate together, and part of the reason that they worked well together is everyone kind of has a role and everyone respects the different authority, right? Older siblings have authority over younger siblings, parents have authority over children, everyone has a role to play, and if everyone plays the role, the family is successful, right? And the family thrives. And so Confucius says, let's do that with the state, right? Let's have the ruler as kind of a father figure, right? And again, the people can learn from the good behavior of the father, they can emulate him, and they can, fulfill their obligations to him. But of course, the ruler has obligations to the people as well, right? The father has to treat his children well and love them and look out for them, and the ruler has to do that as well, right? And so Confucius says that, rulers should act like fathers, and people in the nation should act like the ruler is kind of a father figure to them. But also, what if the father figure or the ruler isn't doing a good job? What if they're not honoring their obligations? I think he says then, but then you can overthrow, right? You can rebel against the ruler if they are not honoring their obligations, if they're not doing a good job, right? So it's kind of, it's sort of based on the family, it's based on mutual respect and obligation, but also if the leader doesn't uphold their obligations, then they can be removed, right?
So, like, if the ruler in a family, like the father or the son, do not do the right thing, can the mother start ruling?
Oh, can the mother start ruling? My understanding of kind of ancient or traditional Chinese society is not extensive. However, based on what I know, women were usually not in the position to be heads of the household. So there was a big difference in terms of power or equality between men and women in this sort of period of history, and so I would suspect no. Although we all know that women are kind of the power behind the scenes anyway, but I don't think you would see that very often, because women just didn't have enough sort of social standing to even do that, unfortunately. As far as I know, but I'm not an expert. I could be wrong.
Even in modern time, women are still respected.
Even in China, women are not respected. What?
They found sons much more than daughters, so some parents would actually intentionally limit the details that they know to go. There's even in China today, that may have, even in China today there is a strong preference for male children, right? And that goes all the way back to this time when not only property was passed down from father to son, but it was the son's job to care for the father, right? In the father's old age, and then even after death, right? We heard about, even going back to Zhou Dynasty, people were making offerings to the ancestors, right? And speaking to the ancestors and asking them questions. And so all of that is kind of the son's job, right? Is to take care of your family, right? In real life, take care of your family, but also take care of your dead family, right? Your ancestors offerings have to be made to them as well. And so all of that falls to the male child, to the son. And so without a son, who will care for your spirit after you die? Nobody, right? So there's a very strong kind of cultural, traditional background to this, but interestingly, it's still important today. And when China instituted its one-child policy in, I think, the 1960s or 70s to try to reduce their population growth, it worked, but as Mulder pointed out, maybe not so mysteriously, most of the children that were born were
men, or the ones that were born and survived were boys. And so now China's male to female ratio is not 50-50. It's kind of, there's a lot more men than there are women at this point. Okay, I think that catches us up. We have a little more of this to watch, and again, I have some more questions to ask you about how he selected his students, how these students kind of sharpened their intellectual skills, the most difficult virtue to attain, and how does one attain it, and how does Confucius's ideas finally become popularized. And so I feel like we left off around 35 minutes yesterday. Is that correct? Is that kind of where we were? I feel like we watched 25 and then 10.
Like when the lady went to the family.
Right. Or just after. Or no, I think they were in the tomb, right? Okay. Let me just see if I can. Let me just see if I can find the right spot here. Oh, that's not the right video. Hang on. Just bear with me here for 1 second, good people. Oh, I see what's going on. I see what's going on. Technology. 29. Okay. And right. Okay, so she goes to the tomb. Okay. This is right after the family part. So, online people, I'm going to start it at 32 minutes, okay? So that's where we'll start, and 10:40. So let's watch hang on here. Yeah, let's watch 20 minutes of it. Let's watch 15 minutes of it and then take a break, okay? So start at 32 minutes, watch 15, take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and see what kind of questions we can answer, okay? So online people, of course, the video link is in Microsoft Teams, and so I'll see you after 25 minutes, I guess, right? 15 and 10 is 25? Okay, good. All right, we'll see you in just a little bit, online people. Yeah. So yeah, he selected his students by by merit, right? Whoever came to him and wanted to study and wanted to learn, they could learn with him, right? And so it sounds like he assembled kind of a group of people around him, a group of students who learned from him. And what was kind of the plan for these students? Because Hadil told us that he was going to bring about a new golden age, I think, right? He wanted to bring a new golden age in China, and so he had all these students, and what was he going to try and do? He was going to find a solution?
Yeah, like how to
Right. He said, or Bethany said that they were engaged in a lot of intellectual debate, right? And that was kind of how they were sharpening their intellectual skills. And so what were they kind of doing, those students, in their conversations? What were they kind of doing in having conversations with each other and having conversations with Confucius? What were they kind of doing? They weren't just randomly talking. They were debating how to be good people, and what was goodness, and what was, the moral or ethical thing to do. Yeah, they were trying to attain Ren, right? To human-heartedness or humanity, however you want to translate it. Sorry, you don't know what I'm asking you for here because it's in my head and you don't know. But kind of what they're doing also is they're kind of sharpening their critical thinking skills, are they not? They would ask a question, right? Like the one question that gets mentioned here is, should you serve a corrupt master if you think you can make a difference, right? And what they would debate is actually arguments, right? They would create arguments. Yes, you should serve him, and here's why. Or no, you still shouldn't, and here's why. And so they would be engaging critical thinking. They're making arguments and trying to, find weak points in the other one's argument. And if you can logically defend your position, then that must be the correct answer to this problem, right? So again, we've talked a little bit about critical thinking in this class, and arguments and premises and things like that. And Confucius's students are doing this 2,500 years ago, trying to find the answer to complex questions, and questions that, the answer is not entirely obvious. And I wonder how many people who worked for Donald Trump asked themselves the same question. Is it good to serve a corrupt master if you think you can make a difference? Now, clearly some of the people who worked for him were just as corrupt as he was, but in the beginning I don't think that was the case. And so I wonder how many people ask themselves that same question. Should I work for this guy if I think I can create a better outcome for the United States? Or should I just leave and let someone else do it? So these students are selected by merit. They are debating and arguing with each other. They're debating and arguing with each other, trying to find the answers to moral and ethical questions, right? And again, in some ways that's really the only way to find the answer to those questions, unless you are a religious type. If you are a religious type, you might pray, or you might, return to your holy writings and see if there's an answer that comes out of there, or you could talk to a holy person, a priest or whoever. But here we see that Confucius' students are debating it amongst themselves, and they're using logic to try to figure out what the right answer is, right? And the right answer is something that is done with Ren, right, with humanity, and something in which you can logically defend, right? You can create a logical argument and support it. At least I think that's what's happening. What do they say about women? Confucius and women. Yeah, he's a little sexist, right? Arguably, all of Chinese society was sexist at the time, but yeah, he doesn't really talk too much about women at all, right? Which is interesting because they're still half the population.
Probably because he believes that everyone should stay in their place, and he thinks that women's role is to care for the family, so they should involve in any political activities.
Definitely not, right? There wouldn't have been any room for women in the sort of political sphere. I think that's probably true. But it is still interesting in terms of the role that women have in, the traditional role that women would have in, creating a home and looking after children and being responsible for raising children. It's kind of interesting that he didn't have anything to say, right? Because
Women's place is at house and taking care of children. So he doesn't include women in his study because he doesn't think that they belong in the school.
Maybe he doesn't believe that they belong in his school or a school.
Probably
His school?
The women with the education.
Then it doesn't seem like he's just talking out of his house. 'Cause it's kind of contradicting his philosophy, because he said that the Daoists, he doesn't agree with the Daoists that not the way was leadership, and so I'm getting confused now.
It's okay.
It's kind of contradicting because he said that people should be able to improve their well-being, but he's also saying that women can't do that they should just stay there. It's like he's kind of being a hypocrite or something.
There's at the very least there's a bit of a blind spot, right? Because if you want to make society better, how can you create a philosophy that really only applies to half of society, right? Half of society is women, and he barely mentions them at all. So it's kind of interesting that they seem to be either beyond consideration or beyond improvement, these women, right? And it's kind of, in some ways it's very fitting, I think, with the times where, women did not have a lot of power and they weren't part of the political sphere, and, he wouldn't, they wouldn't have been considered when you're talking about governance of the state. But I don't know, when you're talking about, using the family as a model and then extending that to society and talking about how to make good people, I don't know, I find that kind of an interesting omission, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that Confucius should have treated women equally, because that would have been very out of step with what was happening at the time. Of course he should have. I'm for female equality, but I'm just saying that might have been an unreasonable thing to suggest, but at the time. But yeah, it's weird that he doesn't seem to pay any attention to them at all. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, and he was raised by a single mother.
And he was raised by a single mom, right? Come on, Confucius. I actually like a lot of what he is saying, but I find it interesting that he's omitted an entire gender, as if they're, not worthy of discussion even. But all right, so the most difficult virtue to attain. What was it? It was what? It was Ren, right? And so, and we said that was humanity or human-heartedness, right? And so, everything you should do with humanity, right? So he says justice without humanity is just brutal punishment, right? It's not really justice, right? What else did he mention? Oh, wisdom, right? Wisdom without Ren, that's just being smart, right? That's just knowing a lot of things. But wisdom is using that and using your humanity, right? And so everything you should do with humanity and with empathy, right? With focus on how other people may feel, right? And treating other people, not doing to others what you would not want done to you. How do we attain that Ren, though? Did they mention that? How to attain Ren? Because Confucius didn't feel like he had attained it, and his students didn't feel like it either. Yeah, continuous struggle. It's very interesting. Yeah, and he says something. The professor says something interesting. The philosophy professor. He says humanity is the highest ideal, but also the sort of, the basic requirement, right? There's a basic requirement for you to be human, but to actually be human is the hardest thing, right? The thing that's almost unattainable, which is weird, right? It's weird that it's the base requirement, but also the highest ideal at the same time. What do you think? Any more questions or things that we should say about what we saw? As I say, I should have put a question on women in here, but I didn't. But at least we dealt with it. Okay, shall we watch the rest? Okay, let's see how this story ends. It's been a roller coaster ride of twists and turns with our lead character Confucius, but let's watch the rest, and then we'll come back and see. So I think if you're watching online, I think we're at about 47 minutes or so. So start there, watch the rest, and then we'll come back and tie up any loose ends on this. Okay? So we'll see online people. We'll see you in just a little bit. Okay, so how do his ideas finally become popular? Because he sadly dies thinking that he's been unsuccessful, right? He's 73 years old. He's dedicated his life to trying to change society, and alas, it seems he has failed, right? But what happens?
After Mao or before Mao,
Definitely before Mao.
the students went around the country and teaching something.
Yeah, so his students continue to kind of teach his philosophies and his teachings to other people. That's true. But where does it really kind of find its way into Chinese culture? Yeah, well, in a way, yeah, they talk about during the Han Dynasty, right? So when the Han overthrows, and we'll get to this, when the Han overthrows the Qin Dynasty, which comes before it, the last Qin ruler turns out was kind of well, he's kind of a jerk, right? He was ruling in a very brutal fashion, and people were being harshly punished for doing wrong things. And so when the first Han emperor comes to power, one of his advisors says, maybe there's a better way. Maybe you can distinguish yourself from the past ruler by saying, you know what, that guy was brutal and awful, but I'm not going to rule the same way. I'm going to rule according to different principles, different ideas. And hopefully this is kind of echoing in your head and sounding a little bit like Ashoka, right? Because Ashoka had a similar idea, is that, this is a brutal way to rule. Is there another way to govern a society? Maybe a more peaceful one. And here we're seeing almost the same thing happening in China with the first Han emperor, where one of his advisors says, maybe we can distinguish ourselves from these past brutal kings and do something different. And so they're introduced to Confucian ideas. And so the Han emperor tries to run a state according to those ideas, and he gets those ideas taught in schools. And so those ideas get kind of infused into Chinese education and Chinese culture, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I forget when the Han Dynasty starts, but I think that we're probably close to the turn of the millennium at that point. So we're probably close to 2,000 years ago, where those ideas are getting introduced into Chinese society, which is remarkable, right? And again, those ideas have even survived an attempt to destroy them, right? And I don't know what you know about the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s, but it was an incredibly destructive period where basically anything old or traditional they attempted to destroy it. Young people attempted to destroy it at the request or at the command of Mao. And fortunately, even that was not enough to destroy those ideas. Yeah, it's, Confucianism isn't necessarily a religion. I wouldn't say that it's a religion in any way, but it can, for a government, either the Han Emperor or for the Communist Party, it can serve some of the functions of religion, right? Because one of the things that we said is that religion is a form of social control, right? It teaches people right and wrong, how they should act, how they shouldn't act. And Confucianism kind of serves that role, right? Even though it doesn't talk about what happens when you die or myth or supernatural powers, it doesn't really deal with any of that stuff. but it is a method of social control, and the first Han emperor realizes that and uses it for that function, and the Communist Party, has recognized that as well. It's a way to get people to follow the rules, and it's a way to get people to respect authority, right? In the form of yeah, it's true. It's more of a maybe a slight a change in attitude rather than a change in government. It's true. The Communist Party has taken a slightly different track, but it's the same government. Although it could also be said that at the time of the Cultural Revolution, Mao was kind of being pushed out of the Communist Party anyway. He'd lost a lot of power and prestige because his attempts at agricultural and industrial reforms were a complete disaster, and so the Communist Party still saw him as an important kind of figure, but they didn't really want him to make any decisions, and so they were kind of, sidelining him. But unfortunately, he still had enough sort of social power to go on the radio and say, "Hey, everybody, let's mobilize and have a revolution and destroy the past," basically. And people did it. Young people did it. Lots of people were killed. Lots of things were destroyed. Lots of unfortunate people like me, teachers, were killed or thrown in jail. So it was an ugly time, right? But yeah, she, and the other thing is that that China is kind of evolving into a different kind of creature at the moment, and it's definitely been a authoritarian communist government for quite some time, but in the past few years, China is really starting to kind of flex its muscles on the world stage in a way that it kind of didn't in the past. So there's also a certain amount of like looking at what she's saying through what we kind of know about China, and it feels a little weird, right? Yeah, agreed. Definitely agreed. Okay, good people. I think I will end it there because we've only got a couple minutes left. Tomorrow, Qin Dynasty, and What did you think of that documentary? Actually, before I end it, was it good? Was it boring? Was it interesting? Are there are no opinions? It was colored things on a screen with noise in the background. So. Biased? How are you biased? Okay. Okay. Easy to. Yeah, I see your point there. I see your point. Yeah, so that I can see the bias there. Okay, I was just curious. All right, that is it for tomorrow, That's it for today. It's not it for tomorrow. Tomorrow, Qin Dynasty. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow.